Hello, myself Sunil Ramakrishna here. Hello, myself Sunil Ramakrishna here. Basically, we are discussing one of the topic that is city creation. In city creation, basically, we are discussing one of the topic that is of account creation. That is India account. In this, basically, we are discussing 3 points. That is SBI groups. That are basically everybody knows that are the political group basically who have kept in front nowadays the businessmen basically. So they basically know that basically firing each and every people basically it has become very dangerous because that the best example is Parliament House basically. Somebody has attacked Parliament House basically. So after that basically they are doing up to house level watching basically. In their house, each and every house basically what the people are doing. In the software company basically each and every people basically are doing what basically. And they basically but in house basically they are not doing the tracking basically because it's very dangerous basically because on last day of world basically that group will be going to generate the matrix basically, so that is basically different of it. So one of the person told that the matrix is very dangerous basically. Here basically the matrix is of what basically earthquake matrix. That is what basically the earthquake matrix. So in this world basically there are around, assume that basically India has created around 1 lakh education like BME, BTech, MTech, BCom, MCom, like this basically 1 lakh educations basically are there. So 1 lakh education equal to, assume that basically they have created some physical areas of that in India also, and they are telling that basically from the, after doing this education they are going to move to Australia, America, Europe, these all places also. How they are so confident that basically they are going to move? Because their physical places are basically created in USA, Australia, America, this whole place basically, Europe. That's why they are writing it now basically. Our education basically is applicable in, after doing this education basically you can do the work in Australia, America, and this whole place basically. So you can just imagine basically the creation has created. So assume that basically like this in currently I am not working, so basically I am not into this. So assume that basically in education sector basically there are around 1 crore area basically created in India, and they are telling that basically they are there are people basically are in USA, America, and Australia also, and they immediately fires. So you can just imagine basically they immediately basically fires. You can just imagine basically they immediately fires basically. You will not believe this basically. How basically that I will tell. Assume that basically 1 crore places of education sectors basically are there in India. But previously basically there was no physical places. There was no physical places in USA, there was no physical places in America, there was no physical places in Australia. So they created the physical places because passing the power supply only will not work. That is going to fire everything basically in the environment basically. So they basically told that by this technique basically it's not going to work. So for that basically you have to create the physical places basically. So for that they told that basically in America basically there are around 1 lakh area created by Indian education group basically, which is handled by the American group basically. That is the America admin group departments basically, which they are telling that basically we are watching each and every education group basically, which is each and every education places basically which is created by the Indian nationality. So you can just imagine basically up to what level the world has reached. And this everything is done basically. Now you can't do anything. Now Indian education basically has merged with the American education. So everything is going to calculate. So one of the person told that that's very dangerous here basically. We actually never thought this, Sunil, basically, that this type of incidents also will happen basically. So here one of the person told that by giving, for example, there are basically around 10 crore B people basically. 10 crore B people. So their death data are getting calculated by B people only. Because their education basically is going to end them also basically. Their education basically is giving the energy. And their education only basically is going to kill them basically. So whenever the B person basically is going to die, that time basically that B education areas basically will be the responsible. So that basically everybody, the B group basically can understand what actually I want to say. Their death basically data. Their death data basically I am telling. Like BCom person, for example, I am BCom person. So assume that there are basically 1,000 areas basically created in India for BCom person. And for outside USA, because in USA also BCom people basically are there. So there also physical places are created basically. For 12th, for 10th standard, for first standard, for junior KG, each and every place basically the education areas are basically created basically. Because first standard basically is in America also, USA also, India also, Europe also, Italy also, everywhere basically first standard group basically exists. So you can just imagine basically the earthquake going to connect basically. You will not able to imagine basically. So mostly basically 35% basically the earthquake. For example, in one day basically, assume that basically today around 1,000 earthquake basically came. So 350 earthquake basically which is going to come basically. That is of what? Around 350 basically, but not exactly 350. Here basically I am just taking as a round figure basically. So 350 education basically, sorry, 350 earthquake basically from 1,000 cities, 1,000 earthquake basically which is going to come. That will be of education side basically. And there are many countries basically who are not connected with the education only basically. Like in South Africa basically there are many cities basically. They had not ever seen the book also basically. So their education earthquake basically is going to connect. Going to connect no, basically. Because their education people basically are also staying. So that basically are very rare cities basically. But their power supply is there. So from power supply basically the education data is going to pass basically. So you can just imagine basically how the world basically has already connected. So you can just imagine basically. I basically can't imagine basically because there is no technique basically created to track basically the education level earthquake basically. So one of the person told that in India basically whenever the earthquake happens basically nobody tracks. Why? Because they have given to France basically. France, you take care of everything basically. But France is not tracking up to the minor level, that is the education level basically. But they might be tracking basically because they are very dangerous basically. But they might not be giving the information to India basically. That due to this education sector basically the earthquake has happened basically. Otherwise basically the education war will start basically. So France believe in peace. France believe in peace basically because they are not giving the education level data basically. And mostly basically nowadays people believe in peace. Even basically the blood basically comes from back also basically. So you can just imagine basically whatever things basically going to happen basically. So here basically we are what discussing, after 2 days the earthquake is going to, that also big earthquake is going to come to India basically. That topic is ongoing basically. Big earthquake, big means very big earthquake basically. So you can just imagine basically big earthquake. One of the person told it, yeah, big earthquake means what basically? We have never seen the big earthquake. We want to see. Few people basically are up to that level also basically. And they want to see everything practically basically. How the big earthquake basically happens. Because nowadays people basically don't believe it basically. They have to give proof, everything basically. Because nowadays the generation are up to that level basically. They want proof basically. So you can just imagine basically. To giving proof basically they have to give everything practical demo basically. One person, I will take one example basically up to what level this basically goes. Assume that basically there are basically energy company like Reliance, ONGC, IPCL. They basically say that basically we can control the human basically. They basically told to America basically, and they basically literally controls the human. You will not believe it basically. They say that basically see that house basically you can see. Then he told that yes basically that house we can see from satellite. See basically how we are going to control that person basically. And they literally control us basically. They say that basically his stomach is going to pain, his head is going to pain, he is going to have this medicine, he is going to have that medicine. So they literally basically do. And they say that basically, see basically we have controlled the human basically. By giving demo. So you can just imagine basically up to what level the world has reached. And in this basically, they don't see that basically anything basically is happening to that person, any stomach has been damaged of that particular person, any eye has damage to that person, any head has damage to person, because they are rich people basically. If anything happens to poor people basically, they basically don't, government basically don't do anything basically. If anything happens to rich people, they basically literally visits their place basically, visits their house also basically. If anybody's head gets damaged of the poor people basically, the government basically say that basically we will give some money and basically we'll say that basically take this basically. Nowadays basically they don't give that also basically. They just say that basically sorry yaar basically that was basically our mistake. That's all basically. But if any rich people basically head gets damaged, eye get damaged, literally government basically go to their house basically and say that basically, are you okay? Are you okay? Why? Because they are rich people basically. Even basically the American government comes and basically they say that basically, are you okay? Like this basically the world has reached basically. So you can't basically imagine the world has reached up to the level basically. Sometimes basically God also basically comes and say that basically, are you okay? Because God also required money basically here. Then basically visits the earth planet. So you can just imagine the world has already done this everything. So one of the person told that up to this level basically the earthquake basically to handle basically to manage basically That is not possible, yeah, basically. Because you have to spend the money by tracking earthquake. Basically, what the France basically group might be doing, what they might be getting. So they told that basically they are the most powerful countries basically in the. They are basically, you can say, top 20 powerful countries basically. So France is the top 20 powerful countries basically. How they basically are? That means they might be earning basically money from that earthquake system, na, basically. Without basically they have basically become powerful top 20 country basically. That means they are getting lots of money basically from the earthquake system basically. Otherwise basically how they are basically become powerful basically, that is also a question. So one of the person told that whenever the earthquake is going to come, na, basically that data basically the France group have, because they are going to pass to the power companies, energy company. I have taken one example. One B person, he is basically software engineer also. Sorry, software project manager or delivery head, whatever basically. He connected to some new ideas, which is, and that also very dangerous idea, which has changed lots of things basically. And assume that basically B education data basically, that is the ideas are connected with few thousand area basically in Vadodara, in India basically, in somewhere basically. In assume that basically it's in Odisha basically. So that Odisha area and the other areas basically across the world basically the B education ideas are dumped, are created. That all basically areas are going to affect basically when the power supply of, assume that basically that person basically is from Dubai. Whenever the Dubai data is going to pass the across the world from Odisha, USA, these, that, each and every place, the earthquake is going to generate. One of the person told that we basically never, Sunil basically have watched this type of video basically of earthquake basically. We even basically France told that basically we have also not watched this type of earthquake video basically in my entire life basically. But they know everything basically, that everything is like this only. So you can just imagine basically how the world has reached, and this everything is done basically because entire education is created, world is created, and 1 lakh education which is created by Hindustan, that is the Indian nationality, who are sitting in the government basically. They have created 1 lakh 1 crore areas basically in India basically, and that 1 crore area basically is connecting to the whole world basically. You will not believe it basically, because B education people basically are across the world basically. B education taken from the India basically, they are across the world basically. You will not believe this basically. So one of the person told that this is the education earthquake video. I basically given the name education earthquake video. Few people says that each side basically, the opposite side basically are also there. So if anybody wants to unbreak basically, unbreak means, for example, earthquake data has generated, that earthquake data basically they want to remove it basically. So that is called as a stable data and unstable data. So unstable data, stable data basically, how they create basically, that is also question basically. But this type of thing basically, if they create, for example, one person told that he basically generated some new ideas basically, so the company basically is not supposed to implement that, but company basically sees profit, they implemented it, and then basically the earthquake happened basically. And they basically done everything basically. So like this basically there are many ways basically of the earthquake basically, that also you can see. Without earthquake also basically system works basically. So one of the person told that this is the education earthquakes basically, you can say that basically. So one of the person told that In each sector basically it's like that basically. Each and every sector basically you can see, each and every sector basically you can see the each and every sectors. B is there, doctors is there, ME is there, B is there, BCom is there, MCom is there, BA is there, and the MA is there. So each and every place basically, each and every area basically the ideas are dumped na basically. For example, B education people basically whenever they basically take the education, that is connected to that thousand cities area basically. And nowadays the world has reached to the digital education also. You will not believe it basically. Previously it was not like that basically. So you can just imagine how the world basically has reached. So one person told that whenever basically the world basically something big is going to happen basically, then few education gets end also basically. So assume that basically third world war will start. Assume that basically. So few education basically is going to end basically. Few people says that basically we don't take BCom people basically. We don't take commerce people basically. So they say that basically we will end commerce education basically. If world war will happen basically. If world war will not happen, that is different thing basically. If world war will happen basically, that I am telling. Assume that basically in World War One, few education basically was there before World War One, but that ended. Before World War Two and between World War One ended, there also basically few education was created, physical place were also created. That education, few education basically are ended. Now basically between World War Two ended and World War Three basically, if happens basically, or basically if not happens, in between basically lots of education basically are created. B education basically was not there basically long before basically. BCom also basically mostly basically it was not there. MCom was also not there. MBA also basically was not there. This all basically came between World War Two ended it and World War Three basically near around it basically. This is basically World War Three. Mostly basically if it will start basically, we basically can't say that basically the World War Three will start only. Just taking as an example basically, if World War will start now basically, so after World War will end basically, lots of education will get end basically. Why? Because they say that basically this is the rule of World War basically. Why basically it converted to World War basically? It was supposed to handle peacefully, but why they basically done the World War? Because that's the army group's ego. Why they came into picture? That is the question basically. Yeah? Why army group came into the picture basically? Army group was not supposed to basically. Everything was supposed to handle peacefully. That means peaceful group basically, that is the Bollywood group, software companies, then the companies, they are basically not doing their task basically. That means that only, na basically. The human resource group, the news agencies group, they are not doing their task. That's why basically the army group came into the picture. So army group basically when comes, then war is 100% going to happen. There is only option basically one, that is war. They were not supposed to come, but they came na basically. If they came, that means war. They were not supposed to actually came. If they came, that means war is only going to happen. There is no other way basically. And there are many people says that basically in army also basically they have peace group basically. They also try to peace settle the issues basically in peaceful language basically. Sorry, not peaceful language basically, you can say basically peaceful way basically. Peaceful language is also basically there. Peaceful language is also there. That is Bollywood group basically. That is peaceful language basically. They only believe in peace basically. They always say that basically we sort out everything peacefully basically. So you can just imagine. So in next video basically we are going to see a little bit more about the earthquake information and Amazon group basically and SBI groups information and their ideas.